for our 11th FairTalk on co-creation and community storytelling. My name's Nadine, and I'm a visual anthropologist and member of the Fairpicture sales and marketing team, and I'll be moderating our FairTalk today. But before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land where Fairpicture's business is conducted in Australia. We honour their continuing connection to land, water, community and the social justice movement, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So just briefly, a quick housekeeping note. For those that aren't able to attend today, we will be recording the session and we upload this recording to our YouTube channel. So if you don't feel comfortable with this, but you'd still like to participate today, please keep your camera off and ask any questions that you may have via the chat box. So the agenda for today's seminar, we will start by asking some questions to each panelist, which allows us to delve into stories and real-world examples and some practical strategies for fostering collaborative partnerships with local stakeholders and creators and implementing community storytelling principles. So the panelists will then have a discussion amongst each other before opening up the floor for a broader discussion and space for questions and answers. We really welcome your thoughts and input and encourage you to do so, and hope that you'll find the information and strategies useful as you create your own impactful stories that promote local narratives and respect the dignity of protagonists. So just quickly to set the scene before we turn over to our panelists. Fairpicture's ethical communication principles are built on three interrelated pillars. These are authenticity, consent, and co-creation. So today, we're going to explore co-creation in the context of community storytelling. Together, these concepts offer profound opportunities for engagement, understanding through common values and experiences, and deep listening in the field and impact of our communications products. But what do these terms actually mean, co-creation and community storytelling? So while people interpret their meaning differently, for us at Fairpicture, we've tried to identify the most industry agnostic term. We don't want to keep this discussion only in the humanitarian or not-for-profit sector, although a lot of our experience does come from that. But we do want to make these discussions more accessible to a wider audience. So central to community storytelling is our role in supporting and elevating protagonists and the wider community in telling their own stories. And this involves valuing local knowledge, sociocultural perspectives and experiences as integral components of the storytelling process to amplify voices and foster genuine representation, to craft respectful narratives that resonate authentically. We brought in co-creation as this really solves the problem of adoption by engaging in intentional relationships in order to create visual storytelling together, where all people involved, so the clients, people in the field, those who are telling their stories, our visual creators, they're really creating on an eye-to-eye level with equitable and ethical communication as their end goal. So in our FairTalk, we'll deep dive into these concepts, sharing our experiences that emphasize the importance of developing communication products and stories through these collaborative partnerships. And we welcome you to join us and share your stories and experiences also. We warmly welcome our panelists who are joining us from all over the world. Morena, Pérez, Joachin. She's a community manager and visual storyteller with Fairpicture, and she's based in Guatemala. Brigette Perenyi, she's an ethical documentary story finder based in Ghana. Tanya Glanville-Wallis is the founder of IBEX Ideas, and she's based in Spain. And Aurel Vogel, our co-founder of Fairpicture, and he's in Switzerland. So we'll move straight into the panel discussion now. Brigette, I'll start with you. You've been really vocal, speaking up on topics critical to the community storytelling space, such as ethics, authenticity, and how to work with vulnerable individuals and communities. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to work in this space?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I really like that question. So when I was 7 years old, I was in a vulnerable situation, and that story was reported by a journalist, and it was viewed globally. And 12 years, like fast forward 12 years later, when I saw the video for the first time, I was horrified. I felt extremely exposed due to how I was portrayed. And so in 2017, when I found myself in the documentary storytelling space, after 6 years or so, I was asking myself, I wanted to do more. I wanted there's more I wanted to contribute to in the documentary storytelling space. My education was in international development relations and human rights. So when I came across ethical storytelling in 2021, I decided to pivot to that direction more. So my focus is working with international, national, and local organizations co-create equitable media on their projects in communities where we co-create and collaborate with those in the stories. So a few months ago, I came across a definition of ethical storytelling, which really exemplify what I do. It says it's a practice of honoring ourselves and others when sharing narratives. It's recognizing that stories are beautiful, powerful representations, and that we each have our own experiences, narratives, and complexities. This definition, plus my personal experience, influence the work I do now with humanitarian and development organizations in communities when creating stories on their projects. So my approach is really what I wish happened when I was a child, is people first and their stories second. This way we create a space for deep community conversation, interaction, by letting their experience lead and guide the direction of the story, rather than sticking strictly to focusing on the agenda of the organization or the project. The goal here is for these stories to contribute to future decision making for sustainable community development. And so that's why I'm really vocal on the topic, and this is what I do.
Thanks so much, Brigette, and thanks for sharing your lived experience with us as well. So, Aurel, I'll move to you. Fairpicture is a strong proponent of community storytelling and has designed and invested in a unique purpose-built platform to support and facilitate co-creation. Can you tell us a little bit about how Fairpicture supports and encourages these approaches, co-creative community storytelling approaches?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to divide kind of in between like what we are already doing today and where we feel is the direction that we want to go to, or where we feel we should develop to in this field. Right now, I mean, you already mentioned it, is this focus on local creators, that we collaborate solely with creatives, photographers, videographers who come from communities they tell stories about, who have an interest, who want to engage in with these communities. It's how we see ourselves, our Fairpicture's responsibility in providing tools to facilitate this co-creation, and especially also to make it feasible. So for organizations, for companies who may have efficiency problems, who may have budgetary restraints. So like the question of what's the next best step in this direction, and where we just say, where we feel there is need for this kind of facilitator, or these kinds of tools, these kind of practices, as like the platform you mentioned, for example, to facilitate this collaboration, this communication, or a consent app, for example, to facilitate this process of respecting the rights of the people photographed. And I think the last one is this fostering the discourse around this topic, like in this call right now, but also where we see a responsibility as a communication agency, also in having the discussion with clients, with creators, in finding a best practice solution towards this goal of a community, of a co-creative communication with the community, involving all stakeholders that are relevant for this individual communication approach. And I guess that's like today. And if you look a bit at the future, then I think it's just strengthening these practices and making them even more accessible towards the people in the photo or individuals themselves. At the moment, we are very much focused on the creators as this easier or closer connection to the community that is accessible through professional creators. But I think this is the strategy where we feel like and ask ourselves like all the time, what are the next best steps? What are the tools we can develop to facilitate this direct discourse, these providing the stories directly from the communities or from people in the photos and videos, while still keeping in mind like how can we make this in a way that it's digestible for an organization, for a small team, for regular campaigns, for example, and not just an individual say like a best case campaign that you do once, but like in a way that you can do recurrently, do this kind of communication.
Thank you. Morena, Aurel mentioned our Fair Consent app, which is an important tool for us as we're really driven by creating products that respect the rights of people photographed. You've been working on a number of long-term photographic projects with local Indigenous communities in Guatemala. Can you describe for us a project or a number of projects that use this co-creative community-centered approach?
Yes, thank you. And thank you. I feel very, very happy to participate here in this conversation, and also to be part of Fairpicture platform with the team who developed this kind of discussions. And as a visual creator, like a few years ago, 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to participate in a project with a local artist for Lake Atitlan. It's an indigenous area from Guatemala, and also with another visual creator from Costa Rica, in the region from Central America. And so basically that I want to share in this opportunity is how we start to develop a communication between us, the photographers, and the local artists and the community also. Basically, the project was to portray how the women have their relations with the water, but that we decide to start is in ethnographic interviews, and like in this way to start a good relationship with the locals. We have tried to understand the cosmovision and the environmental issues that they have in this community area. So we spend a lot of time together with the elders, the women, and the other person in the community. We start doing most than question. We start to have a conversation with them in the local area where they have when they utilize the water in the lake. So in this occasion, we have the idea to we have the idea to include the participation of the all the women. So, but we didn't know how to do at the beginning. So when we start the conversation, we have inspired by the testimonies of the different people that we met. So we decide through the image and the conversation, we decide to write in hand the conversation and the thoughts that they tell us. And so we get surprised is that most of the people that we interview in Spanish, they was talking in indigenous language. So what we do as a photographers, and to that the purpose was to tell the history from them and to the people, to the world. So we decide to write in Sutuhil is the name of the indigenous language. So we decide to ask them to write a letter. And so they wrote a letter with one question that we have in the conversation, for example, about the dreams and the expectation with the water relation. And so the result was very impressed to us and very sensitive, because the thought that they share in a hand was very impact. So we decide photograph the text and mix together with the picture, and that we took, that we portrait them. And also the portrait, we have always the permit, as everybody knows, but this time we decide to most to have the permit, like take the place where they feel comfortable to talk about the subject. So they guide us to say, I want to be pictured here. So we decided to put this together. So finally, we put these two pictures together, the letter and the picture, and that makes one vision. I bring you the example, that the result that we have, and I want to share this. I don't know if the letter can. I think I have to was this. So the picture was something like this. All the woman was portrayed in the place that they wanted, and the text is in the hand made of each one. This one is in Spanish, because the woman decide to write in Spanish even when she speak indigenous language. In the other ones was in indigenous language. So that result was for us very impressive and very emotional, because the text that they give us was not like a was very deep, in the sense of ask for take care of the water, and very sad histories. So we was surprised, because we didn't imagine that. And so the thing that we use as a community is that one of the artists of this project was a Sutuhil indigenous artist from the Lake Atitlan, who the name is Manuel Chavajay. And the other photographer was Pablo Franceschi from Costa Rica and myself. So we decide this exploration around the Lake Atitlan during these weeks, and so that was the result. The name of the project was Our Mother Water, and we decided to put everything in Sutuhil language, in the indigenous language, and give to them this picture printed to every woman that signed it and write it. And that's a little bit about the experience that we have in this community.
Thank you so much, Morena. That's beautiful. And that's also a best practice in community storytelling, to share outputs of the work with the communities. Moving again from the field to the client or process side again. Tanya, in your assignments with IBEX Ideas, can you share with us some of your experiences, how you approach co-creation and community storytelling with your client work?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Nadine. So just for context, IBEX works exclusively with the humanitarian world, so I can't speak of client experience outside of that sector. But we are very much both creators and communications advisors. And for us, really, it all starts with actually understanding our clients and the world in which they operate and the specific challenges they face in gathering stories. And I don't know in terms of the participants here who knows about the humanitarian sector and who doesn't, but just for a little bit of context, it's an incredibly fast-paced, chaotic environment. There's a vast amount of information being shared on a daily basis. There's a lack of time, a lack of resources, a lot of fatigue, high staff turnover. So it's a very sort of chaotic environment in which stories are being gathered. And I think it's really important to understand that for the clients, that there's not necessarily bad intentions, but it's a difficult environment in which to actually implement community storytelling. And just for a little bit more context, very often those that are tasked with capturing stories from the communities are field staff who tend to be the most overworked and the most overwhelmed with existing duties. And what ends up happening is that the storytelling process is almost an afterthought. It's a sort of side note as part of a different brief. And I think it's really important to understand that contextually before we bash the sector. But one thing I will say is that many of our clients really do believe in community storytelling and they really want to be doing it more, but it just hasn't been a priority for them. And again, there's this lack of time to really get to grips with how to do it. So there are no bad intentions, but there are these existing barriers, and these barriers have led to bad practices or bad habits, which are difficult to break. And this is really where our role comes in. So we're very much focused on guiding and influencing. That's been our approach so far, and trying to persuade our clients to think outside that traditional box. And most importantly, giving them sort of practical ways in which to really start doing more community storytelling, more ethical storytelling, and thinking more about co-creation. So some specific examples, I mean, we're a full service creative agency, so we deal with both sort of content capture, so the videography and photography side of things, but also content creation, which is more about copywriting, copy editing, graphic design, and animation. So the storytelling piece really fits in with the content capture side, very much like Fairpicture. And just for a bit of context, the sort of traditional brief that we might get given for a video assignment, there would be a very strict budget and then a request to deploy an international team with a sort of guidance list of interview questions for specific stakeholders, and that would include community members. and always within an incredibly small delivery time frame to fit within that budget. And the result of that traditional brief is that you end up with very little informed consent because there simply isn't the time to do it properly. And you end up with that same sort of single voice narrative in the storytelling component, which I'm sure we'll all recognise is that sort of thank you to the NGO for the work that they've done, which is a completely inaccurate representation of the true story in the field. So what we've been trying to do is to propose an alternative communication solution when we see those sorts of briefs. And we're not looking for more, looking for more budget, because that is the slight misconception within the humanitarian sector, is that community storytelling is going to be more costly for them. So we're not necessarily looking for more budget. What we're trying to do is to persuade them that we can have this sort of co-creative approach in which we can produce the project remotely, but work with a local creator who is embedded within that community and is able to speak with them on a much more open level, not following a strict brief. So removing those sort of strict interview questions so that they're able to share their own stories and what they want to share with the world. And it also leads to the much more informed consent, which Aurel has talked about, and also Morena, that because there's the time to do it, when you don't have those additional travel days, there's a much more extensive window within that similar time frame in which to capture the stories. So generally, we've found that that co-creative approach, our clients are buying into because it makes a lot more sense for everybody, and the result is much more powerful and authentic storytelling. And all I would really add to that is just, I think we have to be realistic with this sort of overhaul in terms of community storytelling, that there are all these barriers within the humanitarian sector, and it is going to take time to make those changes to the processes, because fundamentally it's a question of process. But I think that if we make these sort of small tweaks to the way we're running projects, ultimately down the line, they're going to lead to a big difference.
Thanks, Tanya. We've got about 5 minutes now, just to give the panel an opportunity to ask each other questions, should they wish. I have a question to kick that off. And this is directed either to Aurel or Tanya. When working with clients, what are some of the challenges that you, or maybe a better word is challenging power dynamics do you encounter with this co-creative approach, where there might be multiple or perhaps a number of conflicting opinions in that, such as, what the outcome might look like, and how do you navigate a number of different strong opinions within the co-creative team? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Aurel, do you want to take it?
Up to you. You were laughing, so you have a very strong opinion. You can start if you have a short answer. You can start, or I can.
I mean, it's not.
Up to you.
There's no real answer to it, because I mean, for me, this is the daily battle, because you do, not just, particularly actually, I would say less so with video production and the more kind of visual communications. I find that certainly our clients look to us to really give our direction, our creative direction. So in those aspects, it's actually not so difficult, and we're able to bring in that storytelling piece and make sure that it's well captured, and it certainly comes from the community. Where we really face the battle is when we're dealing more with language and kind of photographs that are used within documents. So I'm thinking more about the sort of pen component. When we're copywriting and copy editing, it's incredibly challenging within the humanitarian sector when we're trying to get our clients to move away from language that is firstly incredibly technical and academic, so it's alienating for many people within the sector and with field teams, and that creates a barrier in itself to authentic storytelling and authentic communication, but also that you have, especially with international NGOs, you have a huge number of teams and hierarchies and number of voices that need to input into any one document. And everybody will have a different opinion. And although we can set a specific production plan, and this is when the review window is going to happen, what you end up is always with an incredibly chaotic input of opinions and discussions, I'm going to call them, although they're a little bit more flamboyant than that. And but yeah, so it's a constant challenge, because particularly with larger NGOs and NGOs that have their own media teams, they have their own in-house communications teams, then it becomes a real challenge. And I don't have the answer, because for us it's a constant work in progress and a constant battle. But yeah, we're trying.
Maybe I can add one sentence to that, and then I have a question for Brigette, because I think this would be very interesting to hear from you also what your experience is in relation to clients. But I would add to this what you're saying, Tanya. I think it's a strategic question also. So it's a question of like, what does an organization commit to changing the processes for real, and not just for a poster campaign they do once and then put it everywhere, and apart from that, continue to do the old fallback solution they've done for years. I think this is one thing. And then I think it's also a question of trust. And this is, for example, something we often, we experience that, and there's so much mistrust in, well, this is not going to happen, or we might lose so much. And very often, I would say the risk is overvalued dramatically, because you don't work with like amateurs. So I think this is kind of a question of trust, to really try something new, or really, or no, not try, but commit to something that you really deeply believe in. So it's trust, values, whether you stand for your values or you don't. And my question to Brigette maybe would be, like in your projects or your productions that you are involved really in the community, like how is your experiences with clients in this regard? Because I feel you're kind of a bit closer to this production part, and I think maybe, I don't know, are the discussions similar? Yeah, I mean, you're nodding all the time, so I assume kind of. But like, what's your experience? That would be very interesting.
Yes, so it's interesting. I'm laughing and even nodding a lot, because I had a situation like that in Ethiopia when I was producing a climate change documentary. And the issue was, we were in partnership with an organization, and I was supposed to give them photos and a write-up for 3 of their projects, ongoing projects. And one of them was school feeding projects. So the communication person in London told me that they need a case study, because they're going to have to put together a document for the funders. And I think, so when I communicated to her the way how I don't take photos of children, and how I could potentially do the photographing in a way that's dignifying and ethical for the children especially. And so when she told me that the client, this is what the donors want, this is what the organization wants. And I said, it's time for us to really start to, like you're saying, trust, right? It's time for us to start building on stories and educating the funders space and the international organization space to let them know that you're used to this kind of storytelling. And yes, it has resulted in this kind of outcome, but there is another way we could do it, because I think people are afraid of what they don't know. And if you don't know how it's going to turn out, you are worried that the funders are going to stop funding you. So yes, I communicated to her that it's time we start educating and start showing the potential differences in creating more ethical and more dignified. Because if we don't say anything, if we don't stand up and present them an alternative, we're just going to keep going in this circle and this conversation. And yes, Tanya, I agree with you 100%, where it's no time, budget, and all of those things. I have Yes, I have experienced all of that, and I strongly believe it's time we start educating all the stakeholders, everybody involved, especially the funders and the international organization and humanitarian space.
Point. I've got one more question before we open up for a Q&A to participants. I'm really interested, Morena, in what you were speaking about in working with Indigenous communities that were speaking local dialects and not Spanish as the main lingua franca. I'm really interested to know how you overcame that challenge if you don't understand the Indigenous language for that particular community, because I'm sure there's many of them. And is that a struggle? Do you engage in like a dual translation? So the Indigenous language to Spanish, and then, yeah.
Well, as in the beginning, we decided to include a local artist member from the lake, and he's an indigenous Sutuhil language, was very like adaptive, the process, because we at the beginning we didn't know that was a difficult, but actually was very flow. We included from the beginning and at this artist, because he speaks the language, and he brings us that sense of the spirit of the community. So that's why we don't have like a misunderstanding. But as my experience, for example, what was surprising to me is that the language became like an archaeological visual portrait also, because my grandmothers speak in Mayan language, and they both were indigenous, and my mother lost the language, and myself too. So when I heard the community speaking in the local language, I wanted like a portrait the language, the sounds, and my feel and my sensation was like a very excited, because it's still at today, there are a lot of communities speaking in that language, but every time is lost, is missing. And so that was the first like the principal effort, that we have to document and reserve this, like a preserve this language in between this documentary work like this. And also because I was feeling I wanted to do that with my grandmothers. So it became from a personal sensation.
Thank you so much, Morena, for that. Yeah, it's really unfortunate that we are losing so many of these Indigenous languages due to modernization. Thank you for the work that you're doing in that space. Now I'd like to open up the floor for a question and answer, general discussion. Please jump in if you would like to direct a question to any one of our panelists, or you can put it in the chat box. Or if you see another question there that you would really like answered, you can, give it a thumbs up. We might start with this question from Shakolo. How would you address the trust issue? What has worked in your experience so far, and which strategies would you recommend to utilize as a client funder to start the process correctly? Aurel, would you like to answer that?
I mean, I don't think I can answer it like definitely, but I think I have two ideas. The first is one coming from a call I had about 2 months ago with a communication professional from a UK nonprofit who pivoted into a story first campaigning approach. So they start with the stories They don't start with the communication concept, they don't start with the campaign concepts, but they start with the story. And I think this, like by default, allows you to give it this flexibility that, for example, Tanya mentioned of, like, you don't need to script if you start with the story because you can be flexible. And I think this is kind of, you need more trust in your own ability to then be creative with the stories that you get. But I think if you're like, I think this, in my personal opinion, is kind of the core responsibility or competence of a communication team, is to be creative with the stories that you get and make the best out of it. I think this is kind of, I think one could be one solution. And I would say the second, I mean, I'm a bit biased, I guess, with Fairpicture, but I mean, we communicate a lot about the impact of communication, the importance of that communication has in structuring realities. And if this is not aligned to the values you have as an organization or as also as a funder, I think you have to, I mean, you can, I would get funders with their own values and say, like, do you want to reproduce values that you don't stand for? So given that most organizations probably have values that are aligned with community storytelling or with giving these voices or making these voices heard, I don't really see a conflict in there. So maybe it's this, what Brigette said, like this, talking about it, this making people aware of that miscommunication is a problem, maybe not in the short run, but in the long run. So I think this might be a second attempt.
Thanks, Aurel. Lydia just asked a question. Sorry if I missed this, but I'd love to hear from the panel how they define community storytelling. I'm not sure who to refer this to. Does somebody want to jump in?
I can.
Lovely.
So community storytelling is, let's say you have a project in the community and the participants that are part of the project, you start by creating time, which I know sometimes we don't have. We create time to have a conversation with your participants and genuinely listen to them and hear what they have to say. Okay. And hear what they have to say, and also as you're hearing them and thinking in the context of your project and outlining how what they are saying can speak strongly to the project, and making sure that what they are saying is kept in their authenticity and their that honesty is kept, and their true experience with your project is kept in there, and involving them literally from beginning to end. There's something in ethical storytelling, and it would take time to get there, but also going back to review the storyline with them, or either screen it if you can, share photos with them if you can. So community storytelling is involving them at each point of your production, each point of your story collection, and that's how you really involve, and that's how you collaborate and participate with them, narrate their story in a way that serves them and in a way that creates impact for the story, that the project that you've launched in the community.
Thank you, Joachin. Okay, there's two questions here for Morena. The first one was, how long was your project? And the second one is, how did you get around the issue of the need for a final product for your client, such as a specific deliverable at the end of the process, that as opposed to wanting it to be totally led and designed by the community and women themselves, so giving them the full creative freedom?
Okay, I will try to explain. And the first one, we took like around 3 weeks. We only have like 2 or 3 weeks, so we expend a little bit more because we decide to be involved and in all the terms that it means. So actually we create this dynamic to be involved until 2 or 3 weeks around. And the second question here for us, we ask ourselves the questions about what will be the final product. So the main thing is that we thought that the final product was going to be to the community driven. So when we decide what or how we are going to exhibit these pictures or these series, we decide to create photo book to drive them back to the unique museum that they have in the community, so the children and the community members can use and read about themselves. So when we discuss with was not a client but kind of an editor, we discussed this project like this, because the proposal was to the only objective was to return to the community. So that's why we decided a photo book, not an exhibition, and because when not the community will have the capacity to travel or to go into another country or another place. So that was the propose. And I think that as we are visual creator, we have many options. And in this case, and it was very very simple like this to propose that, because I could do it by myself, but in this time we decide to call this colleague from Costa Rica, and called also the member of the local community who is an artist, and all together do this. So in that term that you say, if we do the freedom to all the women or something like this, they was the protagonist and we only accompany this. So we was a process. So at the final we have this narrative all together. I don't know if I explain myself like this.
Yeah, thank you, Morena. I've got a question and a comment. This is really interesting, Dominique's question. What does the panel think about the concept of their jobs becoming obsolete eventually, when and if, in an ideal world, communities are wholly responsible for all content and reporting? Do you think there is value in upskilling communities to be able to DIY everything themselves? I feel compelled to direct this question to Aurel, because that's basically what Fairpicture is trying to work on.
I think if the community consists of communicators, all of them skilled communicators, then I would say it's completely justified to be obsolete. But I think given that stories are told by people to other people who have a different reality, I think you need this kind of communicator skill. I think the problem at the moment is not that it's different people from different worlds involved. I think the problem is that there's a huge power imbalance. And very often the communicator in the North defines what the story is prior to the production. That's the problem. It's not that multiple people are involved. I think in this regard, this is also, by the way, why you include co-creation as this word, because we feel if you communicate to donors with, I don't know, in the UK or something, who have a UK reality, I think this is also what Brigette, I think I found it really nice, your definition at the beginning of saying we all have our own realities or our own stories. I think in this way, you have to integrate these other stories into these stories, and ideally you find a process that involves people from multiple worlds to capture the story or record or tell the story. From the people tell the story who lived the story, and the person together with them defines how to communicate the story to other people that this other person might know better, or no, an audience this other person might know better. So this would be my answer. But of course, much of what is being done at the moment in agencies and so on will become obsolete. But I mean, I think that's the goal, because at the moment we have a huge power imbalance.
Thank you, Aurel. There's a comment here from Jim, which it's really important as well. I think it's also important to consider the purpose and use of a story. Who is it for, as well as whose story it is. Co-creating content is one side of this, but the stories that result should not be reserved just for potential funders or global North audiences. Co-creation can also involve how to share, tell, spread the story within the community itself where appropriate, such as community screenings, mentoring opportunities with local creatives, local exhibitions and talks. And I think this is one of, sharing the outcome with the people who share their stories is good process that we should all be trying to do. I don't know if somebody from the panel wants to comment on that, or we'll just leave that comment there. Got time for one really quick question, and then I'll just wrap up for the evening. James says, how can storytelling work for short-term humanitarian life-saving emergency projects? What project timeframe is sufficient to engage in co-creation community storytelling? Or maybe this is good for us with our work with the DEC.
I was just wondering if one of the other participants can give an exact number. That would be really nice. No, I think this is really difficult to answer. Jacques also mentioned in her comment that, like, in humanitarian context, or it's really fast, it's really difficult. I answered there. I think it's about the principle. So I think it's about what principle do you follow and what's the next best step. I think if you have this embedded in your organization and have like a clear strategy, then I think you do the optimal outcome. And then I think it's the question, like, where is our boundaries? So do we have certain stories or certain situation where we say, okay, now we just cannot do this in a way that relates to our principles? Then I think we have to be brave enough to say, okay, then we don't do this story because it will be a miscommunication. I think this is, but I don't think there is a recipe for this. I think it depends so much on the goals. It depends so much on the context, on the situation. So I think this is just part of the complexity. I think that is part of doing these productions, honestly. Unless feel free to correct me, Brigitte or Morena, or so on. But I would see it.
Tanya, did you?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that, ultimately humanitarian work is about saving lives. So that should always come first. Like, the storytelling piece is second to that. And, a challenge that we've had before is that we've been briefed with capturing stories in context where it was really very inappropriate for that to even have been part of a brief. So I think quite a lot of common sense goes into it. And ultimately, you do take the guidance from the client. But I do think as creators, you are in a position to also say no. It's okay to also say no and stick to your own principles. And we've certainly done that in the past. That's just a sort of side note to what you said, Aurel.
Thanks so much. There's a really nice question here from Summer Brooks, and I would encourage if you could please post this question in our LinkedIn group. It's not facilitated by Fairpicture. It's really run by everybody that's working in the ethical communication storytelling space. It's really a neutral space to share experiences, tools, resources, really whatever you wish. You might want to talk about what systems or processes your organization has in place to facilitate co-creative approaches, or you know, do your current communications use community storytelling as an approach at the moment? So I would love for Summer to post this question in that group. Just before wrapping up, earlier this year, Fairpicture released an app that supports the gathering of informed consent. This is something that you know, is extremely important to us as a key principle in everything we do. And you know, we're really keen for you to download this app, and we're also looking for feedback for future versions. So it'd be absolutely fantastic if you could take the time to test it, let us know what you think about it, so that you can contribute to its development and improve future versions. We'd be really, really grateful. That's it. Thank you everyone for being here. We really look forward to having you all at our next FairTalk in August. We don't have a date yet, but we'll send out an invitation and promote it on all the usual channels. And thank you. Have a lovely evening. Thanks everyone for being here and for your commitment to ethical storytelling practices.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Bye.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.